My grandmother went to her grave with a secret the whole family knew, and nobody said out loud. And if your grandmother was anything like mine, she carried the same one. Tonight, I am going to tell you why she never talked about her blood. Why so many of our grandmothers looked into the fire and changed the subject when the old times came up. And before this talk is over, I will give you the 5 signs she left behind for you to find. Because they always leave signs. Sit with me a while. My name does not matter as much as my years. I have seen 81 winters now. I was raised by my grandmother in a little house at the edge of a county road, and I want to tell you about the day I learned her secret, because I suspect it will sound familiar to some of you. I was 9 years old. A man from the county came to our door with papers, a census man. He asked my grandmother what she was, not who she was, what she was. And my grandmother, who I had seen stare down a rattlesnake with a garden hoe, looked at the floor. She said one word, white, and the man wrote it down and tipped his hat and left. That evening, she sat me down and said something I did not understand for 40 years. She said, "Boy, what I just did was feed that man a lie so you could have a life. Do not hate me for it." Now, why would a proud woman do that? Why would she hide the very thing that made her who she was? To understand it, you have to understand the world our grandmothers walked through, and this is the part they never taught in any schoolhouse. There was a time in this country, and it was not so long ago, when having native blood written next to your name was not a heritage. It was a sentence. It could decide whether the bank would talk to you, whether the school would take your children, whether the county would let you keep your land. There were places where a family's whole future turned on a single letter a clerk wrote in a ledger. Some clerks wrote that letter carelessly. Some wrote it cruelly. And our grandmothers learned that the safest thing a woman could do for her family was to become invisible on paper. So they did what mothers have always done. They protected their children with the only tools they had. Silence. A changed name. A story about a great-grandmother from somewhere across the ocean. They buried their songs under hymns and their language under careful English, and they told themselves the children would be safer not knowing. And the children, our parents, grew up half knowing. And we grew up with a feeling in the chest we could not name, a feeling that something was missing from the family story. If you have ever felt that, you are not imagining things. That feeling has a source. Now I want to give you what I promised, the 5 signs a hiding grandmother leaves behind. I have watched these signs show up in family after family, mine included. Count how many of them live in yours. The first sign is the vanishing grandparent. Every family has stories about most of its old people, but there is one, usually a grandmother or a great-grandmother, that nobody can quite describe. No photographs, no maiden name anyone agrees on. Born in one county in one telling and a different county in another. When a person leaves that little shadow on the record, it is often because she stepped out of the record on purpose. My grandmother used to say, "The quietest grave in the cemetery is the one with the most to say." The second sign is the story that changes at the edges. The family says the dark eyes came from a French line, or Black Dutch, or Black Irish. I have heard those very words in 100 kitchens. Now, sometimes it is true, but those names were also the coats our people wore in the cold. When a family reaches for a faraway country to explain a face that looks like the land it is standing on, that is worth a second look. The lie is never in the middle of the story. It is always at the edges, where the questions live. The third sign is in the hands, not the words. What did your grandmother do without ever explaining it? Did she talk to her plants like they could hear her? Did she save seeds in jars marked with no writing? Did she put tobacco down at certain times? Or burn something when trouble came to the house? Or know what the birds meant when they went quiet? The mouth can keep a secret. The hands cannot. What a woman does when she thinks nobody is watching is the oldest record there is. The fourth sign is the fear that outlived its reason. Maybe your grandmother went stiff when government letters came. Maybe she would not sign papers she did not have to sign. Maybe she told you, do not let them count you. Do not tell them your business. Our generation calls that stubbornness. It was not stubbornness. It was memory. A woman who has seen what a ledger can do to a family does not trust ledgers again in this life. I want to stop here and tell you about two brothers because this is the piece that made it all make sense to me. In the county where my grandmother was born, there was a family I will call the Hollis brothers, because some of their people are still living and the story belongs to them. Two brothers born 3 years apart, both of them born to a native mother. When the government men came through making their rolls and their ledgers, the older brother stood in the doorway and gave his mother's true name and put his mark on the paper. The younger brother took his wife and children 2 counties east that same season, bought 40 acres under a name he borrowed from a dead cousin, and never spoke his mother's language above a whisper again. Now you would think the older brother, the one who told the truth, would be the one the family honors. And in my heart, he is. But hear what happened. Within 10 years, the older brother's land was cut up by men with papers he could not fight. His children were taken to a school far away where they were punished for every word of their mother's tongue. Some of them came home strangers. Some of them did not come home. The younger brother's children grew up with shoes and schooling and a roof that no clerk could touch. They also grew up not knowing who they were. 2 brothers. One lost the land and kept the name. One kept the land and lost the name. That was the arithmetic our grandmothers were doing at their kitchen tables, with their own babies asleep in the next room. When I finally understood that, I stopped asking why my grandmother lied to the census man. I started wondering how she found the strength to do it with a steady voice. So when I tell you these signs, understand I am not describing a woman who was weak. I am describing a woman who was doing arithmetic no mother should ever have to do. And the 5th sign, the one that matters most, is the deathbed turn. It happens near the end. The guard drops. She starts saying names you never heard. She tells you her mother's real name was not what the family Bible says. She asks to be buried facing a certain direction or with a certain small thing in her hands. The old people call that the turning home. When the fear finally dies before the woman does, the truth comes up like water from under a dry creek bed. If you were in the room for one of those moments, you already know everything I am telling you tonight. I was in the room for my grandmother's turning home. I want to tell you about it because it is the reason I can speak of these things tonight without my voice breaking. She was 92. She had been quiet for 2 days, the kind of quiet where the family starts speaking in whispers in the hallway. And then one evening near sundown, she opened her eyes and she started to hum. I had never heard the tune. It was not a hymn. I knew every hymn she knew. This was older than that, and it moved differently, the way a creek moves compared to a canal. And then she sang a few words, soft as a moth, in a language I had never once heard in that house in all my years under her roof. I leaned close and I said, "Grandma, what is that song?" And she looked at me, clear as morning, and she said, "That is the song my mother put me to sleep with." And I said, "I never heard it before." And she smiled, and this is the sentence I have carried for 40 years. She said, "You were not old enough to keep it safe until now." Then she told me her mother's name, her real one, not the name in the family Bible, which she said a preacher chose because it was easier to spell. She made me say it back to her 3 times until I had it right. 3 times. Like she was planting something and pressing the soil down around it. She was gone before the week was out, and I have thought many times since how close it came. If I had stepped out to the porch that evening, if I had gone home early, the whole thread, gone, like it never was. That is how thin the thing is that we are talking about tonight. One song, one name, one evening. That is all that stands between a family that remembers and a family that only feels a hole where the remembering should be. Now maybe you counted one sign in your family. Maybe you counted all five. And maybe you are sitting there asking the question I asked for years. If she wanted it hidden, is it wrong for me to go looking? Let me tell you what an old man has come to believe about that. Your grandmother did not hide her blood because she was ashamed of it. She hid it because the world made it dangerous to carry in the open. Those are two very different things. She was not burying a treasure to keep it from you. She was burying it to keep it safe until the ground changed. The ground has changed. The danger she feared is not the world you live in. Honoring her silence forever would mean the people who frightened her win twice. First, they took her name from the record. Then they took her name from your mouth. Do not give them the second victory. I wrote a book for exactly this reason. It is called The Native Way, 20 teachings for the later years, drawn from the elders who raised me, my grandmother's teachings among them. It is the book I wish I could have handed her, and the book I wish she could have handed me. If tonight's talk stirred something in you, the way to it is right there on your screen, and it would honor me and honor her if it found a place in your home. That is all I will say about it. The fire does not shout, and neither do I. Before I let you go, I want to answer the other question that always comes. How do I look at my age, with no papers and no names? Here is what I tell every gray-haired friend who asks. Start with the living. Before you touch a single record, sit with the oldest person left in your family and ask them 3 questions. Who was the quietest one? What did she do that nobody explained? What was said in the last days? Write down every word, because when that person goes, the library burns. Then look at the gaps, not the entries. An erased woman shows herself by absence. A marriage with no listed parents. A child appearing in a household with no mother named. Papers that say one thing in one decade and another thing in the next. You are not looking for where she signed her name. You are looking for where she carefully did not. And here is the trick the record keepers never counted on. Look sideways, not up. A woman can erase herself, but she cannot erase her whole generation. Somewhere she had a sister who stayed, a cousin who kept the old name, a brother like the older Hollis boy who put the truth on paper and paid for it. Their records survived, and their records point back at her like a signpost she could not take down. I found my grandmother not through her own papers, which were swept clean as a winter field, but through a sister I never knew she had, 3 counties over, who lived and died under the family's true name. One afternoon in a county courthouse, an old clerk with kind eyes set a book in front of me, and there it was, the same mother's name on 2 lines. One line leading to a woman the record called by our true people. The other line leading to a woman the record called white. 2 sisters. One paper wall between them, built by hand, on purpose, in fear. I sat in that courthouse and I wept like a child, and the clerk, bless her, just put her hand on my shoulder and said, "You are not the first one to find a wall like this, and you will not be the last. So if the trail under her own name runs cold, do not stop. Walk the family sideways." The truth survives at the edges of a family the same way green survives at the edges of a burn. And then, whatever you find or do not find, do the last thing. Say her name out loud at your own table. Tell your grandchildren the story of the census man and the single word, or whatever your family's version of that story is. Because here is the truth I have carried down all these winters. A people is not erased when the ledger is wrong. A people is erased when the grandchildren stop telling the story. As long as you tell it, she is not hidden anymore. She is home. And there is one more thing I want you to see, because it is the most beautiful part, and almost nobody notices it. Even while she was hiding, your grandmother was smuggling. Think about it now with new eyes. The cornbread she made away, nobody else's grandmother made it, with the crust done just so. The way she braided hair on a Sunday night, 3 strands pulled tighter than any schoolteacher did it. The words she used for weather that you never heard another soul say, the way she called a certain wind a talking wind, or knew rain was coming by an ache and a smell, the quilt patterns, the way she never let bread be thrown out but always set it outside instead, for the birds, she said. You thought those were her quirks. They were not quirks. They were the pieces of a whole world, broken small enough to fit through the needle's eye of those hard years, carried one by one into your childhood where no clerk could ever write them down. That is the inheritance she smuggled through, friends. The ledger got a false word, but your hands got the truth. You have been carrying it your whole life without knowing what it weighed. Every one of you listening tonight who ever felt that hole in the family story, I want you to go stand in your kitchen tomorrow and look at what you do without thinking and ask where it came from. Some of you are going to find her there, not in a courthouse, in your own hands where she hid herself all along. The old people say we carry our ancestors in the blood, and that is true enough. But I say we carry them closer than that. We carry them in the small ways we do ordinary things. And no government on this earth ever made a form that could take that from a family. My grandmother kept her secret for 60 years to give her family a future. The least I can do with the years I have left is spend them saying what she could not. If this talk touched you, share it with someone who has a quiet grandmother in their past. And if you want to walk further with me, the book is there, and I am here, most evenings, by this fire. May you find every name they tried to take from you. And may you carry them the way she carried you. Quietly, faithfully, home.